Hi, everybody. Welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the Colorado Symphony announcing this week that their classically Cannibis concert series will go forward, but as an invite-only fundraiser after receiving a stern letter from the city of Denver. Patty, this whole invite-only thing seems like a clever way around the law, but if I could just send out a lot of invites, maybe I'm all the way around it, or am I reading? What do you think about the plan?
You'll be shocked that I'm going to defend at least this tactic the city's using, because if you've gone to art openings where you are not, unless you got the right kind of permit, you're not allowed to serve liquor at a lot of art openings. So the way people get around that is they're allowed to have private invitation lists, and it's a private event. So if it works for art gallery openings that want to serve beer or wine, it should be able to work for the symphony in this case. Whether the symphony's gambit really paid off with the amount of attention it got, whether or not they'll sell enough tickets to really make it worth their while, we have yet to see. But I think probably in general, if they wanted to look like they were ready for the next millennium, approaching, really attracting a new generation, I think this probably did it.
David Cole from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. Does this set a precedent for other private property owners in Colorado?
As long as they keep their consumption within their property and not outside and visible to the public. You know, it doesn't mean you can have an art gallery can have like a lawn party with people spilling onto the sidewalk and outside. I think it's as Vincent Carroll wrote in a good column in the Denver Post, the constitutional amendment which the voters approved specifically excluded public consumption from what was being allowed. So if they're going to have an event like this, they're doing the right thing to not make it a public event.
Penfield Tate, attorney with Greenberg Traurig and a longtime state lawmaker. What do you make of the new developments?
You know, my greater concern is not really directly about the whole cannabis piece. It's about the credibility of the symphony and the viability of the symphony. I think for years, many of us have worried about whether the symphony can continue, and there was a period of time when it went away and then came back, and it's always struggled to keep sort of a level footing. And I'm just curious, it'll be curious to see if within the arts and culture community, this sort of gambit is perceived as just a little bit too cute by half. And people begin to wonder if the symphony is sort of making its last gasp here.
Ed Sealer from the Denver Business Journal, are they jumping the shark, or is this clever strategy?
Well, people keep using the word gambit. I would use a different word, and that's gimmick. I mean, this just seems like something that's designed to catch attention, catch headlines, maybe catch some people. But, I mean, really, where's the crossover here? How many people who are pot smokers are going to say, you know, I wasn't going to go to the symphony before, but now that I can light up a joint to some Mozart, I'm going to go see this? I don't really think that's going to attract a lot of people. In fact, I think it actually may push away more of the seasoned, long-term, deeper pocketed season ticket holders who may say, look, this is not what I want to be putting my money to, and maybe this is a private fundraiser, but this is not my idea. I don't know. I think this is really risky at best.
Let's get to the show. Gubernatorial candidate Bob Beaupre racked up some key endorsements this week. Mitt Romney announced his support, saying that as a former governor himself, he trusts that Beaupre knows what it takes to lead Colorado. Beaupre also has been endorsed by Attorney General John Suthers and State Senator Greg Brophy. Patty, what effect will these endorsements make in this 4-way primary?
Well, I think we can tell by the thundering applause we've heard all over Colorado this week when Mitt Romney came out what a difference it's going to make. I haven't actually detected a ripple in the Republican race with this. I mean, I think probably tonight when Tom Tancredo has an event with Dog Chapman, that may actually get more attention. Mitt Romney didn't do so well in his last campaign. I don't think he's really going to help Bob Beaupre on this. It's still going to be a crazy numbers game because you have Gessler, you have Kopp, you have Tancredo, and how they wind up all splitting the vote is going to make the difference a month from now. And I don't think Mitt Romney or Greg Brophy or John Suthers coming out and endorsing Beaupre is going to make the difference. It's going to be getting the Republicans to all agree to go vote for him.
That's a good point. David, who's the more valuable endorsement, Mitt Romney or Dog Chapman?
Greg Brophy.
Good answer.
The people who would be influenced by Dog the Bounty Hunter with whom Tom's been friends for a long time, actually, I think are already in Tom's camp. If you're a mainstream business establishment Republican like Beaupre, one of the things you need to do is not necessarily be the most conservative candidate, but you've got to show to the conservative part of the party that you're conservative enough. Brophy's very helpful in that regard. He's popular, well-respected across the board in both parties, and I think he will help Beaupre for that. For the Romney endorsement, Romney's network comes with a lot of money, and so it's a signal to that broad network of rich people that they should invest in Beaupre, so it's helpful in that. In terms of getting people to actually vote for Beaupre, I would say getting endorsed by a guy who lost a winnable race after spending an enormous amount of money by running an excessively timid campaign and being the guys like, oh, I'm Mr. Business Manager, and well, as it turned out in business management, you got beat by the community organizer. That doesn't really, you could justifiably worry about that same thing happening to Beaupre. So there's a negative to the Romney endorsement as well.
Penn, what do you think? I mean, if John Hickenlooper is looking at this week in the governor's race news, is he a happy guy? Is he threatened by this endorsement? Did it make a ripple like Patty talked about?
He's ecstatic and he's having a beer. This is a bizarre staging for all of the reasons you've heard. You got Romney, a guy who lost the state of Colorado to Obama, where I think the reason he lost is because he wasn't the guy who was governor of Massachusetts who ran for president. He was some stranger we'd never seen before who all of a sudden was reborn and ran for president and lost a very winnable state. Ironically, I think Suthers may be the most helpful endorsement to Beaupre out of the three, a guy who's run statewide and won, a guy who's got some credibility with the conservative side of the party, but also is known as a pragmatist, is kind of mainstream, is a more likable personality. I like Greg Brophy, but he and all 15 people who were going to vote for him are not going to make a difference in this endorsement. But it also, it just feels oddly that Bob is grasping almost too early. I submit the reason he lost the last time is he wasn't just himself. He was too busy trying to be this or look this way and look that way instead of just saying, this is who I am, this is what I believe in, this is where I come from. I think it just doesn't play well with Coloradans. And the only thing he's doing is marginalizing some of his opponents in the primary, but I don't know if even that matters because I don't think any of them are going to beat Hickenlooper at this point.
And wrap it up for us.
Well, I think what these, especially the Suthers and Romney endorsement show, is that Beaupre has clearly become the establishment candidate. And while that's a bad thing in years past in the Republican Party, we've seen so much Tea Party surge, it's actually a good thing this year if you look at kind of the national momentum. Aside from the Nebraska race, where the Tea Party favored candidate in the past week beat an establishment candidate who was largely disregarded even by the establishment at the end, establishment candidates have been doing extremely well in states like North Carolina, very soon in states like Kentucky and in Idaho, and that, you know, if it were an establishment versus Tea Party race, that would help out Beaupre a lot. The interesting thing is there's not really a Tea Party candidate in this race, though. So does being the establishment candidate when you're splitting a vote four ways, especially when Tancredo is going to bring to the ballot this really odd coalition of libertarian and maybe people who, you know, who are arch conservatives as well? I don't know. It can't hurt, but these are different dynamics than we can really use these endorsements to predict something out of.
Denver Mayor Michael Hancock and City Auditor Dennis Gallagher are looking into a $40 million contract awarded to a woman and minority-owned business for work at DIA's Hotel and Transit Center. Burgess Service was awarded the contract, but reportedly handed over a majority of the work to RK Mechanical, a large company not certified as a minority-owned business. David, there are a lot of different angles to this. We tried to kind of encapsulate here in the topic, but there's angles all over. What do you make of the story?
This is the classic scam that has gone on all over the country on so-called minority and women business preferences. Is you have this front company, which is owned by the person of the appropriate skin color or genitalia, that gets the bid, and then they subcontract it out to somebody else. One of the really good changes brought to municipal governments by the progressive movement in the late 19th and early 20th century was to say, instead of using the spoils system, we're going to do things like the awarding of contracts based on objective criteria. This is the opposite of that. This is not, we give the bid to the person who has the best bid at the lowest price. We give it based on some kind of political preference. Back to the Pena administration, in Denver, there have been fights over Denver's minority preference. Denver's claim under Hispanic Mayor Federico Pena was, oh, we're the Denver city government, and we try not to discriminate against people of color and against women, but for some reason we just can't stop ourselves, so we need to bind ourselves to this quota system in contracting. And they prevailed with that argument in the courts. And so what they have is, in effect, a spoils system where a fraction of the contracting, instead of going to the most qualified bidder at the best price, goes to whoever they prefer. And as it turns out, it's a scam anyway, because it doesn't actually go often to real minority or women enterprises, but simply to fronts that pass through the money and, of course, inflate the cost of the project to the taxpayers.
Ben, is there a way that this program can work? I mean, it's obviously complicated, but can Auditor Gallagher and Mayor Hancock sit down and figure it out, or is there something flawed with the actual program?
No, and the mayor and the auditor ought to sit down and figure it out. And I would submit the program does work, that this is probably an exception to the rule or an aberration. We've got to remember, part of why these programs exist and have been sanctioned by the U.S. Supreme Court for years is an understanding that, given America's unique history, preferences have been granted historically. They've just often gone to businesses that are owned by white men, and there's been an exclusionary system in place for decades in this country. So these programs were an attempt to remedy that situation and give a broader cross-section of Americans an opportunity to participate in commerce and industry, particularly with government, where their tax dollars are helping to fund part of how the spend is conducted. There are problems with every program. They've got to figure this out, because the big question that I don't think has been reported yet is whether Burgess won the contract on its own and then sold a piece of it to RK, or whether Burgess bid as a consortium, as a team of companies where the work was pre-divided up on the front end, and this was actually the structure that was in place. I don't know the answer. They've got to figure it out. Both minority and women-owned businesses want this done right, because every time there's a problem like this, people begin to question the efficacy and the reasoning behind the program, so we've got to do it right. But, we can't act too quickly, I think. But clearly the auditor ought to be involved in this, the mayor ought to figure it out, and the broader contracting community ought to be involved in this conversation also.
And there's been other conversations about this, about talking about the availability of more businesses. When you have a contract this big at DIA, we're talking about a pretty major project, $40 million. This isn't a small deal. Is this a broader conversation for the business community in Denver?
Well, I think it's a broader conversation as well about how you want to run this program. And here's where I come from on that. Because there were some debates at the State House this year, actually, about whether the state needed to do a study of whether it's using enough minority contractors. That bill eventually died, largely under pressure of, hey, this is going to cost too much. But some of the ideas that were brought up were, by just bringing this out into the open, you are getting more minority firms involved. The number of minority firms came and testified, we don't even know how to bid on state contracts. Now, I can't say whether that is the same way they feel about Denver's contract, but maybe Denver should step back now. I mean, the idea seems to be, hey, we fulfilled our duties. We met our numbers by giving this contract, but clearly they didn't meet the meaning of this law. Maybe the problem is the numbers. Maybe, having an arbitrary amount of business that's supposed to go to minority-owned firms is something that should be less important than how do we use our resources to get out into the community and let people know how to bid. And in fact, this frankly wouldn't even just be minority-owned firms. It would be a lot of small businesses that are trying to and can do jobs like this, but don't even know how to work with the city. And I would say that's the more important thing they need to focus on now, is not what numbers are we hitting, but how are we telling people they can actually submit bids and be judged on who they are. So.
Patty, anything involving DIA, and especially $40 million, is going to attract a lot of attention and will continue. This is not just going to suddenly go away. What do you think the best way for the mayor and the auditor is to handle this?
Well, I think it's a good thing we have a quota for white Irishmen in the being involved in things in the city, because Dennis Gallagher continues to show that he is really focusing on a lot of important issues. I think it's a great idea that he take a strong look at this. It's been 25 years since the planning really started, really got underway on the airport. Things have changed, and as Ed said, maybe it's time to really push how small businesses can apply and get a piece of it, because what you find if you really look further, as the auditor has at different contracts at DIA, for a lot of those vendors, you have they're in the hands of a few people who happen to be minority, but it's the same thing. Are small new businesses getting a shot? So I think it's a great idea for Dennis Gallagher to look at this. If he can work with the mayor on it, great, but he's an independent auditor, so he doesn't have to. And I do want to say, do not remove the minority and women program at Colorado Inside Out, because otherwise Penn and I would be replaced with John Caldera and John Andrews.
That's not going to happen. You have a standing seat. Yes, absolutely. Let's get to the next topic. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce released ads this week featuring Florida Senator Marco Rubio in support of Representative Cory Gardner and his bid for the U.S. Senate. The chamber spent over $650,000 for the ads that are in both English and Spanish and set to air throughout the state. What was your impression, Penn, of the ads? They started to make the airwaves, and does it make a difference that the fact that there are some ads in Spanish? It's not commonly a Republican ploy.
You know, I thought I understand what they're trying to do. I just don't know if it's going to fly. Number one, I think, you know, it's hard enough for Coloradans to know who's on the ballot in their state. I don't know if most Coloradans know who Marco Rubio is. So I don't know if that's going to be influential. I think it'd be far more effective if Cory was doing an ad speaking in Spanish rather than somebody else speaking in Spanish for him in the background. And third, the ads still skirt the central issue for Cory Gardner, I think, which is where he's been on choice and women's productive rights issues. You know, he's tried to manage that, I think, somewhat clumsily in the early stages of the campaign, but I don't think the ads are going to get him over that. So I don't think they present a problem for Udall at this point, but we're early in the campaign. Who knows? Udall may start producing ads with someone speaking Spanish in the ad. So we'll see. I understand what they're trying to do. I just don't know if this was money well spent in the fashion in which it was undertaken.
Ed, Rubio has been one of the darlings in this, for the Republicans in the Senate, and I understood at least the reasoning why. I thought they should have changed up the set a little bit, because the set reminded me of his response speech, the State of the Union, which of course ended, or not ended, but had that classic search of the water bottle move. And I kind of was waiting for some point in this commercial where he was going to reach for that water bottle. Obviously just a production accident, so the producer and me. What do you make of the ads?
Well, I don't think it's the setting, although I think it would have actually been great if he would have reached for the water bottle at the end. I mean, you know, good humor always helps an ad. I think it was the issues that were discussed. When you look at the Hispanic bloc of voters, which we as journalists have all been doing for the past 6 to 8 years as they become an increasingly larger bloc and more influential bloc, this is a bloc that is voting solidly Democratic. And when you look at the instances where they didn't, such as George Bush's presidential run, where a much larger percentage of Hispanics voted with Bush than they did with even other Republicans on the ballot that year, you have to ask why. And the reason is this. Hispanics seem to tend to gravitate to Republican candidates that are speaking about issues that are very specific to their community. Bush was a big pusher for immigration reform. And so when I look at the ads, I think, okay, it's nice that Rubio, who is a rising star, who is probably well respected by the community, is doing this, but he's talking about kind of these generic issues. Cory Gardner knows how to hold down the budget. He knows how to hold down spending. I think you need to get more specific to the community you're targeting if you're going to launch a Spanish language ad to have it be more effective. But, you know, it couldn't hurt.
Patty, were you waiting for a water bottle moment?
Oh, I was. This is... Well, what they really have is they have filled not just their water bottles, but their coffers. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has so much money. They've endorsed Kauffman, so I'm sure we can see some kind of Kauffman ad coming from them. The only significance I think this ad has this early in the game is that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is willing to put out a lot of money. I think it was too early to really be pushing Cory Gardner this way, because it's not going to be hard for the Udall camp to maybe look into how the U.S. Chamber of Commerce really does not have very many Latino-friendly policies, and that Cory Gardner has other issues. So what it signifies is there's going to be a lot of money in this campaign, but it was probably too early to spend it on this.
David, Patty makes an interesting point. Were you surprised the amount of money the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is willing to put into an election in May?
No, I mean, they're the biggest of businesses, so they've got more money than they can spend practically, and it's wise to do the pro-Gardner stuff early for a guy who's not very well known statewide, before the Udall allies define Gardner to the population. Marco Rubio is likely running for president, so this is also sort of an early campaign commercial for himself. Udall, of course, will have plenty of Hispanic advocates who can do ads for him whenever they want in Spanish. The Chamber of Commerce is the leading, next to La Raza, is the leading pro-amnesty lobby in the country. So if one considers, because they like lower wage, they like more workers, which means they can pay lower wages. So if that's considered Hispanic friendly, they're about the Hispanic friendliest organization on the planet. And I guess I would also say that, remember, Hispanics are not one block. They're a huge number of people, and they have different interests. To Ed's point about what's speaking to them, I think small business formation and helping and getting the government out of the way of impeding small business is something that's really important. And I would suggest that reproductive rights and abortion is a big issue for 25-year-old voters in Denver, but you are not. Cory Gardner is closer to the mainstream of the Hispanic community by being anti-abortion than is Udall.
Governor John Hickenlooper held meetings this week with energy and business leaders to try to find a way to avoid the 11 potential fracking proposals for making the ballot. While leaders committed to continue the conversation, few were optimistic about finding a solution. Ed, you've been writing about this, researching it, which we frown upon here at Colorado Inside Out, but tell us what you know.
Here's what I know is that the governor's office says, look, we've met with Polis twice in the past 3 months to sit down and talk about this. And in fact, people around the governor bristled a little bit when people told us coming out of the meetings this week, we really think Hickenlooper needs to stand up to Polis a little bit more and you know, show someone in his own party, hey, I've been working hard. The disagreements are that the Polis camp doesn't apparently think that Hickenlooper's work on this, which includes moving the setbacks between wells and homes from 150 feet to 500 feet in the past 2 years, is enough work. And so there's a disagreement on, you know, what is enough. There is also immense disagreements within the people who are opposed to the ballot initiatives on what needs to be done here. Some say, the hell with it. I want to go to the ballot. I want to fight Polis. Let's just do this. Let's not compromise, for fear that if we compromise now, someone else is going to come back in 2 years with a more draconian measure for us that we're going to have to try to come up with our own compromise for again. Others are saying, look, we can't have 1,500-foot, 2,500-foot setbacks put into the Constitution that will just wipe out areas of drilling in this state. So where it stands right now is the governor says nobody has walked away from the table, but a lot of people are at the table are telling us, I just don't know that we're going to be able to work this out in the next couple weeks, which is what they need to do in order to avoid him turning in the signatures for a ballot initiative like this.
We're running late on time, so Patty, give me a quick take.
Well, I think, unfortunately, we are not going to have a compromise of any kind in time to stop the ballot measures, and we will have huge numbers of ballot measures and huge amounts of money going for them in an ugly campaign.
David.
I completely disagree with Polis on fracking, but I really admire the way he is a guy who just stands up for what he thinks and doesn't get bullied by the party leadership. The fair compromise is if a local community bans fracking, they don't get any of the statewide revenues that come from oil and gas development.
Penn?
You know, my hope was that they would reach a compromise, get in special session, do something, and obviate the need for all of the ballot measures. I don't think that's going to happen, which is to Colorado's detriment, because regardless of where you stand on the issues, too many of these ballot measures don't get you in a sane place in terms of dealing with the issue, and that's the problem here.
Our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, start us off.
Sheriffs past and present behaving badly. We have Pat Sullivan, who failing drug test, back in trouble, and down in El Paso County, good reporting by Dave Phillips on Terry Makeda, who wanted to give the big honorary award to himself.
David.
Dudley Brown for his latest lie of the week, claiming that Alan Gottlieb, who runs the Second Amendment Foundation in Washington State, is promoting national gun registration. That's like saying focus on the family promotes teen gay sex parties.
Ben, try to follow that.
I'm not even going to try, but it's a disgrace of the week, but also sort of my heart goes out to Pat Sullivan for a man who did so much good and stood for so many of the right things. To just sort of see this downward spiral is distressing.
Ed?
The Cultural Studies Club of the Harvard Extension School, which only after enormous pressure this week canceled their support for a satanic mass on campus. So what's next? A pro-bestiality rally? Maybe some fundraising for the Nigerian kidnappers?
Yeah.
This is one of those instances when people need to say there are morals to adhere to.
I completely agree with that one. Say something nice about somebody, Patty.
Two great new old building projects, the Colorado National Bank that reopened as the Renaissance Hotel, and also close to here, Industry on Brighton Boulevard, which is a really fabulous project.
David.
My wife of 27 years, Deirdre, whose birthday is coming up.
Oh, fantastic. Happy birthday, Deirdre.
Good luck to the governor, because he's got all these bills. He's got to consider which one he vetoes and which ones that he doesn't. So I'll just give him a shout out and say good luck.
Ed.
We clearly didn't coordinate because I had the same idea as Patty. The Stonebridge Properties for the historic renovation work they've done to the old Colorado National Bank building while having it on the National Register of Historic Places while they were paying to renovate it. That's pretty impressive.
That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. We tape this show every Friday at 12:15, and now you can watch it live at cpt12.org. That's right, we're live streaming CIO every Friday at 12:15, so spend part of your lunch hour with us. For our viewers watching our live stream right now, stay tuned for a special behind-the-scenes segment. And for our broadcast viewers, we'll see you next week. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night.